I know we've got a packed schedule, so
let's dive in. I'll put myself
dive
in.
on in. Just trying to get the right screen view, of course. So just admit another person. Then we'll get into it. So thanks, ladies, for joining us today. We have the pleasure of having Catherine run through her fantastic career experience with us. So she spent 20 years working in some of the largest technology companies, including SAP, HP, IBM, and now Microsoft. Has a fantastic story to share and covering a lot of whole human elements. So fate, luck, ups and downs, divorce, resilience, and being brave enough to follow your own heart through your career and career choices. Some of them easy, some of them not so easy. So I will hand over to you, Catherine. It's, you know, a really easy open space, as I said to you before. We really looking forward to you taking us on this journey and being able to ask you some questions at the end of your presentation. So
cool.
Please fire away.
Thanks, Rosie and Michaela, for having me here today. It's always great to get to talk to like-minded women. And also just to make a point that is just, you know, it doesn't make my story any more special that I'm sharing it today or more unique than many of the things that you have experienced in your careers and lives. But I do this in the spirit of trying to maybe help people, lift people up, inspire people, and hopefully get some learnings from my personal self along the way, which I invariably do. So I've put the timer on for about 12 minutes, so I can't go over that. So that gives us a lot of time to talk and ask questions. And so if I look at, you know, my career and life in chapters, then really the first chapter is childhood, and there's always a beginning, a middle, and hopefully an end is long away, but I'll take you through kind of it a little bit in that structure. But from the childhood perspective, I don't know if you can actually, I'm going to see if I can move. See, I'm a Microsoft person, so I'm going to complain about Zoom, and I'm going to say, why on earth are you not on Teams? But anyway, yeah, so I was born in Sydney in pretty low socio-economic area called Blacktown. It's probably gone further ahead now, but in the west of Sydney. And I would say that my dad and mum were they were only 18 when they got married, 19 when they had my brother, and me at 20. They were 24, so they had very little. And they'd moved from the country, and Dad's father had not sent him to university to do law, which was his dream, because they didn't want to spend the money, even though they had the money. They were great parents, but obviously back then their priorities were quite different. And so I had a pretty great childhood. My mum was actually a stay-at-home mum my entire childhood. And if I have any regrets about that, I guess there was a little bit of a lack of respect from me as to why she made that choice at the time, because all the other mothers, in inverted commas, were working really. But when I look back on it, and when I talked to my dad, there's no way she could have had a job at that time, and also supported him, because he, like me, was very ambitious and very determined, and came with really no university background and little education to eventually head up Compaq New Zealand here, even though I was in Australia at that time, and held very, very senior positions at Hewlett Packard when they bought Compaq. So he was really my role model, to watch someone who started with very little and through sheer grit and determination built his career. And so I guess I grew up with a father and a mother who said to me from the very beginning that you can be anything you want, including the Prime Minister. It's only a matter of attitude and application. And so I was really fortunate, because there's many people who don't have those sorts of parents who give them that belief in themselves that they can do and be anything that they want to be. I don't aspire to be the Prime Minister, but it did embed a pretty deep, yeah, I guess high bar was always set, particularly by my dad, in terms of what, you know, he thought that we could become, my brother and I. My brother is 5 years older than me. And that meant that, you know, I tried to excel in all sorts of spheres of my childhood. I played for University of New South Wales, not university, Fourth State of New South Wales for softball. You can see the picture on the far right-hand side. I, you know, kind of came second in the school, closely behind my best friend for what we call the high school certificate. And yeah, I always, sought to be a high achiever throughout that sort of childhood period of my life. So it was a pretty good childhood. My mum and dad are still together, and yeah, I'm very thankful for the fact that my parents told me I could be anything I wanted to be, which was a huge step forward on from many, many kids out there who don't have that same opportunity. And then I guess, you know, I look at the chapter 2, and that was when I stepped out of university, and this kind of goes to my theme that sometimes your career is not in one kind of linear direction. I actually changed degrees, was it 3 times? Yeah, okay, so I changed degrees. So first of all, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer because largely Dad hadn't been able to, so I think I was trying to be what he couldn't be to please him. And I didn't get in that year. It was a very high score required that particular year. Had I been a year later, I would have romped it in. So I didn't get in, so I decided to do a marketing and hospitality degree. Didn't like it. Then the next year was able to get into law. So went from Macquarie University to Uni of New South Wales. Then had to be, the other way around. Then I had to be true to myself and say, actually, I hate this. I really don't like this. And then I changed again and went to finish an economics degree. So at the time, my mum actually said to me, you are a quitter. And you know, you keep changing your mind, and look, I'm really glad that I made those deviations, and I think it's really unfair to expect of a 17-year-old, which is how old I was when I came out of school, to know exactly what you want to do in terms of university and a career. And so graduated from university, and it's a really funny story actually. Dad, despite being I think at that time he was the head of Compaq in New Zealand, and this was when I was still in Australia. I spent a couple of years in the financial services sector and found it incredibly boring, and thought I'm going to go into IT because Dad earns a lot of money and I'd like to earn a lot of money, and I'm going to go for a job at Compaq, and I should get it because my dad's, you know, really senior there. And in fact, one of the guys who interviewed me actually was one of his friends, but I didn't get the job. And I thought to myself, well, screw them, I'm going to prove them wrong. So I actually went for a job at IBM and got it, and for many years I competed with my father. That again, you know, seeming failure, and then I managed to turn it into almost, well, it was just I think 10 years at IBM Australia and then New Zealand. And so when I went to IBM, the thing that I was reflecting on is that there's always people that you can say there were milestones in your career that you may not have, like Sliding Doors. Has everyone seen that movie with Gwyneth Paltrow? That's probably one of my favorite movies because it's so true. You can be in a moment in time and take one or other step, and it can be quite pivotal in terms of where you end up. And for me, I started on the phones at IBM selling, which was really hard. And it was a great way to build resilience. Some days I'd go home as a 22-year-old and cry just because customers can be quite awful. Back then anyway, it's not the same world that we live in now. That would be very un-PC and very, you know, much taboo, but back then it was tough. And so I kind of made sure that I achieved as much as I could achieve in that phone-based role, and I was offered promotions along the way. But for me, there were people like David Thoday, who went on to be the CEO of Telstra, and he was the CEO of IBM at the time, who would take me in his car. That was back when they had a driver as an MD, and we would go to see customers, and he would, you know, I mean, getting that kind of learning and that mentorship at that young early 20s age was pretty incredible. There were other people who, you know, there was a guy called Jules Fornerino. I was an account executive, and we lost a big deal with a telco, and I was probably 25 or 26, and it was very apparent in the loss review, because he was the head of telco sector for IBM, that I'd stepped back and let Global Services, effectively IBM Global Services, run that deal. And he took me aside afterwards and he said, "You're better than them. Why did you let them run the deal?" And what he didn't mean is I was better than them in, you know, any humane sense. What he meant is I was just as good as them, and why didn't I believe in myself? And that for me was a real kick in the face and a real awakening. And most people who work with me now in sales pursuits know I'm anything but that, and very much a bit of a control freak. And so for me, there are so many instances in that early formative part of my career where people were incredible mentors, and that really for me, in every single company I've been at, whether it be went from IBM, short misstep to Integral Axon, which we'll talk about shortly, then, you know, SAP, HP, SAP, and now Microsoft. There have been individuals who I could single out and say they made me, you know, what I became, and shaped me. And so from that perspective, you know, I obviously got married to a Kiwi and moved over here, and that didn't last. But we have two beautiful kids, Rosanna, who's 11, and Max, who's 14 now, much older than that first day of school of Rosanna on the far right. And probably one of the darkest periods, along with the divorce, was, which came after this, was in between where I joined a company called Integral, which went on to buy Axon and is now then got bought by NTT Dimension Data. And you can see that's a headline there: Blinkhorn quits Integral Axon, and that was in Reseller News. And look, being open, it was because I just fundamentally disagreed with the board that I was on. It was all men, and I was the only woman. And as I look back, you know, even if they were on this phone call, I would say they bullied me, and I probably let them to some extent. And I left that company. And probably the thing to note there is what I didn't realize is I probably was still in postnatal depression at that point. So I had postnatal depression with Max, which I wasn't aware of at the time, but with Rosanna, it was diagnosed as very severe. And was probably about 12 months after her that particular situation happened at Integral Axon. And it was a really, really heart-wrenching time for me. You know, it was quite public that I'd left on bad terms, that I'd simply, you know, kind of walked out of the boardroom. And it turned out that had I stayed and had they been honest with me, I'd probably have walked away with several $1 million when NTT bought them. And you can imagine, you know, I took 6 months off. I was home with 2 kids, and you imagine your life pass you by and you say, what could have been? You know, I wouldn't have to be going back to work had they not swindled me, had that not happened, had, you know, and there were a lot of what ifs. And faith, as you know, for me, if I hadn't had God during that period to turn to and say, why would this happen? Why didn't the other path happen where I had $3 or $4 million in the bank? And I probably could be a real mum for at least another 5 to 10 years of their lives. And I remember a verse which was, all the silver in the world is not worth all the wisdom. And for me, that was a period where I just grew hugely in wisdom. And after that particular situation, you have to bounce back. And I remember EMC calling me and wanting me to start immediately and join them. And I had a number of different approaches, and your ego, you know, slowly gets rebuilt again. But I had been a director, and I decided that I wanted to take a step back and be a mum. Tried 4 days a week, but that didn't work. And so I took 6 months out, really thought what was important to me, and went back to an individual contributor role at Hewlett Packard. And Colin Henderson was then my sales manager, now the MD there. And he was, you know, he was a great believer in me, and that really helped me rebuild what was pretty damaged confidence, really. And I was successful there. And then a couple of years later, SAP asked me to join them again. It was a senior account executive role. And what really stands out for me was that when the divorce occurred, and pretty low times and tough times. But I remember the managing director, Graham Riley, again, one of those special people in your career, saying to me, he'd been really kind and really, you know, but he said, Blinkhorn, I need you back at 110%. And sometimes, you know, those people who kick you in the ass and tell you that that you're not quite at your best are the kindest people that you can have. And so none obviously rebuilt myself, rebuilt my life, learned to juggle career and kids, learned to trade the ego, which was a director and management and, on the high potential path at IBM before I took that detour to a small company with an equity stake, and really learned to trade that. And that was hard. You think, what do people think of me? Do they think I've failed? Do they think, whatever it might be? And so at SAP, I decided that I would stay in the account executive role, and I was there for about 4.5 years. And you can see Graham Riley on the left with a great guy called Adrian Griffin at my leaving drinks, because Vanessa called me one day and said, did I want to take over? Vanessa Sorensen, our amazing country GM here, the Dynamics business for New Zealand. And so it was a step back from being an individual contributor, which I love, to from leading account teams to back into management again. And I did that for 2 years, and it was one of the most fun parts of my career, building what essentially often felt as a startup at Microsoft. But I realized late last year that something was missing. Hysterectomy later, which happened this March, just gone, I didn't realize what brought me so low. But basically, the doctor called me in, I think it was November, and said, thanks for doing the blood tests. I'm not quite sure how you can even function right now. So blood, it's gone down to below where I would even should be functioning. And all of that just kind of piled up on top of me. And I had to really fundamentally think through December and January what was going to make me happy. I broke up with my new partner at the time. We're back together now, but I went away with the kids for a month in Europe, and I actually realized that I needed to be back doing an account executive role at Microsoft. I needed to be back in the thick of customers, and it meant going down in reporting line. And again, I just had to say, well, what's really going to fill me? What's really going to make me happy? And it wasn't doing that management role anymore. And as luck would have it, Vanessa was incredibly supportive. And as luck would have it, after a little bit of a reshuffle, I got my dream job. So this is a slide a couple of days ago on Monday of me and my partner in crime, David, at Fonterra. So Fonterra is a strategic. So by the way, this is all about luck and faith. And this job was not the job I signed up to on April the 1st. The job I signed up to on April the 1st was a territory of about 8 accounts, and not my dream job. My dream job was to run a strategic 500, which is the top 500 Microsoft accounts in the world, that you just get incredible exposure. You get incredible, at the top level up to Satya Nadella. You get, resources and people and support like you wouldn't believe. And a couple of months into the new role, Vanessa said to me that the person who'd been running it wanted to change. Did I want to do it? And it didn't take me more than about 5 seconds to say yes. And so I took that role on June 1st, I think, sometime in June. And so look at that, I took what appeared to be a step down and out of management to a role now where I'm back to reporting to where I reported to before, and have far more exposure and far more job satisfaction and far more customer contact than I ever imagined that I would. So sometimes things can really, really work out. And we've got an amazing journey with Fonterra to drive over the next few years. And so I'm already over time, but yeah, in terms of my story, I wanted to be vulnerable today to let you know I'd gone through things like postnatal depression, hysterectomies, divorces, breakups, leaving, kind of unceremoniously leaving a job and it being reseller news. And I just think that at the end of the day, if I can respect myself and hold true to my values, then life will treat me very well, as it most of the time does, almost. So yeah, in terms of the epilogue, staying in the book theme, I would say that childhood's never perfect, but having people who said I could be anything I wanted to be is pretty darn important. And when my son sometimes says he wants to be a European football player, or not so in Europe playing football professionally, part of me just wants to say, oh, that's not going to happen, Max. But you can't do that to kids, you have to let them believe they can do whatever it is. But being brave and being true, and this is a big thing for me, is not about moving forwards. It's about moving forwards, but not necessarily upwards. And ego and status can be traded for happiness and fulfillment. People say to me, like people at our end of year party, which was June 30, financial year, said to me, oh my God, you just seem so much happier and so much more approachable than you were in that other role. Like you're a different person. And I'm radiating, I have a purpose, and love that other role, but it wasn't my purpose. And the other thing is redefining. You know, you can see that all through my career and story, there have been people who have stretched me, who've been honest with me. And I try to thank them, and I try to stick with them. You know, I still have a beer with Graham Riley, the former MD of SAP. And whoever I can. I had 2 guys on the phone last week I was talking to them about, and they were mentors when I was at IBM. And I said to them, you know, I wouldn't be where I am without you guys. So yeah, I'm just really had a pretty up and down, trials and tribulations. But at the end of the day, I couldn't be happier with the choices that sometimes I didn't necessarily make, but were made for me, and the choices that I've had to make, which have been difficult. So that's me.